Hey there! Making payments online has traditionally been a lengthy process, requiring multiple steps and filling out dozens of fields. But it doesn't have to be that way. My name is Jose, and I'm a developer programs engineer on the Google Pay team. And today, I'll show you how to equip your applications with Google Pay so that your customers can pay quickly and safely. Come join me. Before I start, and in case this is the first time you're taking a look at the Google Pay APIs, I'd like to share with you 3 reasons for integrating Google Pay into your applications. First, when you add the Google Pay button to your website or mobile application, you're simplifying the checkout flow for your customers, reducing the number of steps to as few as 2 clicks or taps in the best case scenario, and just a couple more otherwise. This not only makes your checkout process faster, but it also has an impact on your conversion performance. Second, there are millions of users already logged into their Google accounts, whether that's because they use services like Gmail, YouTube, or Search, the Chrome browser, or the Android OS. What this means for you is that these users don't need to log in again to pay in your website or mobile application. And third, security. When a user chooses a form of payment on Google Pay, the payment credentials are encrypted before they leave the Google servers. It is not until you send those credentials to your payment service provider that they will be decrypted in order to complete the payment. This makes your application resilient to external vulnerabilities. Let me explain that. Suppose that your application becomes compromised and payment credentials from your users are exposed. Since the payload you received from Google Pay is encrypted, there is nothing that anyone without a private encryption key can do with it, making it effectively useless. With that, let me go back to the integration. You won't believe it, but I just had a web application ready to integrate Google Pay in it. In this application, I'm selling clothing items, just like this, t-shirts, hoodies, and others. I'll use this website to run through a full integration with you. In essence, to add Google Pay to my application and launch it, I'll need to start by signing up to the Google Pay Business Console. Then I'll integrate the online API into my application, and after that, I'll submit my integration for approval. Once my integration is cleared for launch, I'll publish my website. Let me start with the console. Alright, so what I'll do now is I'll sign up to the console. First is I'll access the console through the URL pay.google.com/business/console. And what you will see is once you sign up with your business email address, your business account, you will be presented with 2 different pieces of information that you will need to fill out. The first one is going to be your business name. That for me is going to be Jose's T-shirt shop. And the second one, as you can see, is the country where my business operates from. That for me, it's going to be Spain. So let me select that. As soon as I hit next, then what I'm shown is the dashboard of the console. Now, this is the main place of operation for your Google Pay integrations. There are 2 things to call out in this section. First one, if you look at the top right side of the screen, you will see that there's a section called, or there's a field called Merchant ID, right? That is the identifier that identifies your business under Google Pay. And you will need that once we do the integration. The second is if you look at the left side where the menus are, there's a section called Business Profile. I'll go there to update my business information because this is going to be necessary by the time I submit my application for approval. And there are 3 sections in here. The first one contains information about my business. That is for me, my legal business name and my public business name are going to be the same. So that's Jose's T-shirt shop. Down below, you'll see an MCC or merchant category code that defines a bit more what you do as a business. It looks like for me, this one, 5699, miscellaneous apparel and accessory shops, looks great. So I'll select that one. Next up is the legal address. So I'll fill that in, the name that is Jose. The street of my business is Calle del Peral, number 8, postcode, and finally the city, which is Ciudad del Peral, and the province. That's going to be Madrid for me. I'll hit save, and head down to the last section of my business information, which is, as you can see, just a way for your customers to connect with you in case they're facing trouble. So the first one is just the URL for your business. That for me is going to be pay-demo.web.app. The customer support URL looks really similar, just with a support at the end. And two more pieces of information. One, an email address for customer support, once again. And to end up, a phone number. Great. Now I'll hit save. And I'm done with that. Now, with that information, I'm ready to code my integration and submit my application for approval. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that you have signed up to the console and added your business information, you're ready to get started with integration. And actually, I am ready because we're going through my actual website. So let me go ahead and get started. This integration is going to be divided in 4 different sections. I'll start by loading the Google Pay API online web library. Then I'll check whether my customer is ready to pay. That will give me either a positive or negative response. I'll create the Google Pay button. And finally, I will load the payment data, which will open the payment sheet for my users so they can pick a form of payment to complete the transaction. Now, just to mention that, you can also integrate the Google Pay API on Android. You will need to use the Android libraries, but the process is rather similar to the one that I'll be doing now. So let me get going. First, I'll go to my index.html file because this is where I'll load the JavaScript library through a script tag. I probably should say a script element. I'll add the async modifier because we want that library to load asynchronously without conflicting with my page load time. So I'll add the source as follows. And finally, given that this is a script that is loaded asynchronously, I need to pass a onload param with the method that will be called when the library is loaded. That's going to be on Google Pay loaded. Close my script. Now I can go ahead and open or create my index.js file. Well, I'll configure the different parts and I'll go through the rest of the 3 steps that I just talked about. So why don't I start by creating that function that we just referenced in the script that's going to be on Google Pay loaded. First thing that I'll do is I'll create an instance of the payments client. Payments client is an object that will simplify how I make those requests against the Google Pay API. So I'll do that. I'll create an object to hold this instance that is going to be called Google Pay client, that's it. And I'll instantiate it on the on Google Pay loaded function. It's going to be an object of the type google.payments.api.payments_client. And it's going to take a few params for configuration. In fact, in my case, I'm just going to pass in one of them, which is the environment. I'll set it to test. By operating in the test environment, I can code my integration fully, and I can take a look at how it feels and how it looks on my site. And I can try to make payments as well. Note that when you use the test environment, you can use real cards to take payments, but those cards will never be charged. So this is ideal for trying things out. You probably realized that while I was creating the payments client, I had some autocomplete help. You can get that too if you're using Node. You can install the types /Google Pay. So that will get the types into your root folder of your application, and that will be taken by your code editor to show you the different autocomplete help, which will make the integration easier. If you're using TypeScript, those types will also help you get feedback about your syntax at build time. Now, without further ado, the first request that I'll want to make is ready to pay. With this ready to pay, I will learn whether the customer who is transacting on my site can pay using Google Pay. So I'll use my Google Pay client that I just created and call is ready to pay. Now this request takes some params. Few items, part of them are configuration, and other are speaking about the kind of cards that we accept, the different payment methods. So let me go ahead and define that before I keep going. So the root object that I want to pass into is ready to pay request is something that I'll call Google Pay configuration, just because it sounds like this is a pretty good name. And that will include fields like API version, major, and minor to determine which version of the API I'll use. And I'll also add the allowed payment methods. This is a list of payment methods that I accept on my site, right? I'm going to call, for now, it's only going to be one to be consistent with my existing experience. I'm going to call that card payment method, and I'll define it just below. So card payment method is going to be of type card. Remember that there could be other different forms of payment, right? Other than credit or debit cards. This one is going to be a card. So I'll pass in the type parameter with the card value. And then I'll add a few more params that define this object. Two of them. First one is allowed card networks. That will determine which networks I accept on my site. In my previous site, I was accepting already Visa, MasterCard. So I'll go ahead and replicate that behavior. And then on auth methods, I'm going to take cards which are saved directly to Google Pay and tokenized cards, which is what the cryptogram 3DS value stands for. Now there's one more property that I haven't defined yet. That is the tokenization specification. Now remember that Google Pay doesn't process the payment. That's something that you can either do yourself if you're PCI DSS compliant, or you can use a payment service provider to do that. Like what I'm doing. I'm using a PSP or payment gateway. So in this tokenization specification, I'll add information that refers to that. And I will save that to an object called tokenization specification that I'll define just now. The fields that you need to pass in this object will change depending on which payment gateway you use. You can take a look at our documentation to see what are the available PSPs or payment gateways that can work with Google Pay. And inside of our docs as well, there's a section that goes into more detail about the different fields that you need for each different payment gateway. Generally, that's going to be a combination of your identifier, something like a merchant ID on your payment gateway, and then something that demonstrates that you are who you really say you are. That is something like a token or a public key. Now for me, the type is going to be a payment gateway. And the params, given that this is just a test integration, I'm going to use a example name for my gateway and a random value for my merchant ID. Great. So with that, I have everything that I need. Let's do a quick recap on the information that we just created. So I define an object called Google Pay configuration that I'll pass to my isReadyToPay method that has the versions of the API as well as the allowed payment methods. Inside of those payment methods, I determine or I specified the networks and auth methods allowed on the credit cards that I'm taking. And finally, I included the information for my payment gateway. So all that's left is just passing that Google Pay configuration to isReadyToPay. And now with that, I should get a response. That request returns a promise, and upon completion, you'll get a result. So I'll create a function to capture that at the end of the promise. Now there are two different values that you can get. The first one is either that your user can pay with Google Pay or that the user cannot do that. So let's just cover both cases to make sure that we provide a good user experience. So if the result is affirmative, that is response result equals true, I'm going to go ahead and create the Google Pay button so that I can show it on the UI. I'll create a method, create and add button that we'll define later on. If the response is false, that is my user cannot pay with Google Pay, then recommend you not to show the button just because they cannot pay with Google Pay. Then feel free to offer the user different forms of payment to complete the transaction. In my case, I'll do nothing because I'm sure I'll be able to pay with Google Pay. This request can also error, and that is most likely because there's an issue with the configuration. In that case, make sure to check the logs, make sure to check the response so that you can inspect the error and fix the problem before you submit your application for approval. So now we know that our customers can pay with Google Pay because it's ready to pay return true, or at least this is what we're going to follow to complete our integration. So the next step is, as we already defined in the promise, in the resolution of the promise, is to create and add the Google Pay button to our UI, to our user interface in our page. So I'll go ahead and create that function, create and add button. And for this, there's another request, there's another method that you can use that is offered by the API. That is the create button method. So that is going to give me the final result of the graphic that I need to add to my page, so that you don't have to worry about things like localization or making sure that the button looks right. Just by calling that method and passing in some configuration params, then the API will return you that object. All that you will need to do is add that to your DOM. So this is what I'll do. I'll save that to a variable called Google Pay button, and then I'll call it on my client, Google Pay client, create button, and I'll pass in some configuration. The first parameter that I'm passing in is the onClick parameter, which will take care of responding to a tap or a click on the Google Pay button, because we'll want to do something after that, right? So for that, I'll create a function later on that it's going to be called on Google Payments button clicked. There's additional information that you can pass in, things like to make your button longer or shorter, or to change the theme of your button, whether that's black or white, depending on the background of your website. For me, I'll stick to the defaults because they happen to be the long button and the black theme, which I think goes great with my site. The last thing I need to do is to add that UI element to my DOM. Again, what the create button method returns is the UI element by itself. This is the HTML element. So all that's needed is just get an element that already exists inside of your HTML file and append this Google Pay button element as a child. So I already have a div element with the ID buy now. So I'll go ahead and get that by ID, and I'll append the Google Pay button as a child to that. Now, if you go and take a look at your web application right now, you will see that if you are ready to pay with Google Pay, you will see that there's a new button that has been added to that container or to that element. So you can keep track of progress. I won't do that. I'll trust that I'm doing the right thing. So I'll keep going to the last step of the integration. And that is going to be when my customers hit on the button, that the payment sheet opens up so they can choose a form of payment. And for that, I'll use a third request under my Google Pay client. But first off, let's define the function that captures the onClick event. So function on Google Payments button clicked. And with that, I can get started. Now, this request takes a very similar configuration to what we passed to the is ready to pay request. So what I'll do is I'm going to take that and clone that information into a new object that I'll call payment data requests. and I'll call the previous configuration, which is called Google Pay configuration, that if you remember already contains the API version and allowed payment methods. And I'll add on top of this. So I'll add two more params. The first one is going to be information about my business under the merchant info param. There's two elements that I need to add. The first one is the merchant ID. If you remember, when we sign up to the console, on the top right side of the screen, there was an identifier that identifies you or your business under Google Pay. Now it's time to get that value back, paste it in here. The second value that I'll add is the merchant name, which is the name of my business as I show it publicly. That is Jose's T-shirt shop. The second param that I'll add to this request is information about the transaction. Because remember that what I'm doing now is I'm showing the payment sheet to my users to complete the actual transaction. So I'll need to include information such as the price, whether the price is final, currency, country code, and so on. You can also request some other parameters like billing address of the customer, shipping addresses, information like phone number or email, which I won't need for now, so I'll leave those out. But if you want to learn more about that, make sure to check the documentation and the reference about this request, the load payment data request. So going back to the transaction info, I'll include 4 different params. The first one is the total price status. This param determines whether the price that I'm showing to my user is final or can be changed or needs to be changed. What I mean with that is that sometimes when your customer changes the shipping address or payment method, it can be that you need to update the price. For me, this is not going to be the case. I know that my price is final and has been already calculated, so I can go ahead and set it to final. Now, the total price of that item will be based on the selection of the user. So I'll take that item, I'll take the price, and I will add it to this parameter, the total price param, which is my selected item dot price. 2 more to go. The currency code, it's going to be EUR for euro for me. I think it's a bit weird to say EUR, but that's what I just wrote. So I'm going to take euro, and the country code is going to be Spain. Great. With that, I've finished completing the configuration of my payment data requests. So now, very similarly to how we did before, I'm going to use my client and call the load payment data requests. And I'm going to pass in the payment data request object that I just created. Now, this will also return a promise. So upon resolution, I'll be sent the payment data for the user selection. So let's just say that your customer went in, clicked the Google Pay button, opened the payment sheet, and then selected a Visa card. This is what I'll get in the payload, in the JSON object as a response of the promise. Now, I said that before that the payment information is encrypted, and that's actually the case. You will not be able to see the actual payment credentials for the selection of the user. Said so, you will be able to see information like if you requested it, information like the billing address or shipping addresses. So you can inspect that and you can do something about it if you need to. So what I'll do once the promise gets resolved is I'm going to call a new method called process payment data. In that method, I will send this information to my backend servers so that I can complete the order against my payment gateway. I'll pass in the payment data. Now, this promise can also error. And in this case, there are 2 likely reasons for that. One of them is similar to is ready to pay. It can be that there's a configuration error. So if that's the case, make sure to inspect it and fix it before you submit your application for approval. It can also be that your user canceled the transaction. So after clicking the button and opening the payment sheet, it can be that the user closed the window. So you still get a response in the form of an error with the type cancel, so that if you need to, you can do something. You can show an EUI, you can log some information, whatever you need to. For me, I'm going to log that as an error into the console. And that's really it. Now, the last function that I'll create is the one that will send the payment information to my backend servers, so that again, I can complete the payment transaction as I've been doing before, so that I can create the actual order against my payment gateway. So for that, I'll use fetch and create a post request to my payments endpoint. In this case, it's going to be the orders endpoint. This is going to be a post method because I need to pass some information in. The type of information will be application JSON, and the body will be the payment data that I just received. So with that, I'm ready with my integration. Took me about 90 lines of code, including the code to send the information to my backend service. So I'll go ahead and see how it looks like. Keeping my fingers crossed that there was no configuration error and then everything looks fine. So here I am on my site. And as you can see now, as I refresh, the Google Pay button is showing at the bottom, at the end, on the container that I specified. So that means that I am ready to pay with Google Pay. Now, when I click it, so you can see the payment sheet is opening. Now, my accounts, I'm going to pick one of those and all the different payment methods saved under that Google account. So I'll choose my Visa card and I'll complete the payment. And that's really it. You can see that the transaction went in successfully. So now with that, I am ready to go to the next step. And what I'll do now is take a few screenshots of my integration and submit my application for approval on the Google Pay Business Console. Let's do that. Great. So now that I have completed my integration and I've checked that it looks fine, the next step is to go into production. And for that, I'll have to submit my integration through the Google Pay console. Why would I want to do that? Because remember, you're not operating in tests. If you want to take payments, real payments from your customers, then you'll have to get clear for production. Your application will go through a quick review process in which the Google Pay team will take a look at your integration and make sure it adheres to the terms of service and the brand guidelines. And after that, you'll be able to flip the switch to production and go live. So I'll show you how I'll do this for my website just now so that you can replicate that. So I'll go back to the business console where everything started. This time on the left side, I'll go to integrations. And on the section of integrate with your website, I'll click on add a new website. There are a few pieces of information that will need to get filled out in here. First one is the website URL. That is the final URL where my Google Pay integration is going to be in production. That for me is pay-demo.web.app. The integration type, if you remember, for me, it's going to be a gateway because I'm using a third-party payment service provider to process the payments. Finally, there are a few screenshots that I'll need to upload so that we can show to the Google Pay team how my integration looks like. So I'll upload one for item selection, pre-purchase screen, payment method screen, Google Pay API payment screen, and finally post-purchase screen once the payment has completed. So I already took these screenshots before that to avoid making this really long and boring to you. So I'm just uploading them as we speak. And now that I have them, I'll go ahead and click on Save Changes. My information is going to be checked. If everything is fine, which I very much hope, then at the top, the Submit for Approval button will be enabled. There we go. So as you can see, now the Submit for Approval button is enabled. I'm going to go ahead and click it. That's it. Let me recap what I did so far. I signed up to the Business Console to obtain my merchant ID. After that, I implemented the Google Pay Online API into my web application. And I just submitted my integration for approval. Now, I'll wait for the Google Pay team to review my integration and get back to me with the next steps to go live. I'll let you know as soon as I receive the approval email, and we'll continue from there. I'll see you in a bit. Hey, great news! I just got an email stating that my integration has been approved, which means that, nicely enough, all I need to do is just flip my environment to production and deploy my application to go live into the world and take real payments. So I'll just do that right now, just because it will take me a tiny bit of time so you can see also how it looks like. So I'll go back to my index.js file where I added all the different configurations and steps of the integration. And the only thing that I need to do is flip the environment in the instantiation of my Google Pay client to production. So where I have test, I'll say production. I'll also double check that my payment gateway information looks about right so that the payment can go through, can be actually processed. And that's about it. I think this looks good. So I'll commit that right away with a message saying pushing to prod, yay. And I'll enter that so that my CI pipeline triggers and my site gets deployed. It should be getting deployed right now. So let's give it a few seconds. And then I'm going to go ahead and check out how it looks so that I can show it to you as well. So I'll open a browser and I'll see if the deployment process has already completed. So I'll go to my production URL, pay-demo.web.app. And yeah, it looks like it's already out. So as you can see now, I'm seeing the digital page for a t-shirt. And you can see at the bottom that the Google Pay button is showing. So everything looks correct. I'll go ahead and click that. And I wouldn't do that in a different situation, but I'll pay for my own items just to show you how it looks like. So I'll select the account that I want to pay with. I'll choose the credit card that I want to pay with. I'll hit on pay. Now, hopefully this goes through. Yes, there you go. Easy enough, right? Now you can go ahead and work on your own integration by following the same steps that I just did during this video. Take a look at our documentation on g.co/pay/API to learn more about the online APIs for web and Android. You can also find us through the Ask Google Pay hashtag on Twitter and Stack Overflow. Thank you for being there, and I'll see you soon.